Welcome. Welcome and thank you for bringing your heart and your interest to this important topic. We are so grateful you are here, whether you are joining us here in person at St. Andrews or on the Zoom screen. Hi, Zoom friends. My name is Pastor Laura Zeal, and I am the lead pastor at Bethlehem Lutheran, which is directly across the street from St. Andrews. And I have the privilege and honor of moderating our conversation this evening. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord of all, we give you thanks for this opportunity to come together from many different faith perspectives, from many different social and personal perspectives. This is the blessing of community. That become the very experience and very gifts and a common voice for the sake of the neighbor. We live, O God, under the shelter of your grace. And we recognize and care and see those who lack shelter and affordable housing in our community. And so we gather at the center of your love and grace for the sake of all. Bless our conversation this evening. Bless us as we return home and live out the message of love and grace which you have for the world. We pray this night. Amen. We are gathered here this evening from faith organizations and community organizations. We gather as individuals, all of us caring deeply about our neighbors, about one another, and about the need for housing in our community. Just some housekeeping this evening. Behind you all, we have our good friend Laura. She is here as translator this evening. If anyone is in need of translation, by all means, speak to her and we'll get you up for that. Mrs. Gracias, we are very grateful for your willingness to do this. She and I had an interesting conversation about how hard it is to do her work. Other housekeeping, if you are in need of coffee, it's decaf, but nonetheless, there's coffee for you this evening. There are cookies as well. Behind the glass door are restrooms. If you need them, feel free to come and go during this conversation as you like. Also, welcome to Rachel Beck, who comes from the Board of Supervisors, and Bruce Ellers, who is on City Council as well. We just have a lot of wonderful, welcome, we're so glad you're here. We have a lot of wonderful community people with us here this evening. Our topic tonight is affordable housing. We'll be here together for about an hour and a half. Affordable housing is becoming an increasingly central issue to the health and well-being of this community in which we live. Homelessness in our community is also a significant issue and an important conversation, but not the topic of tonight's discussion. Tonight, we are gathered to discuss and largely to learn from these experts about what is going on with affordable housing in our community and how we might be a part of the solution. The gathering tonight is hosted by Faith in Action, which is an advocacy ministry of St. Andrews in partnership with Bethlehem Lutheran, with the support of the San Diego United Methodist, and as well as Vincent de Paul of St. John's Catholic Church. Together, we are working to build relationships, to affect change for the sake of our neighbors. Faith in Action works with Judah Coker, who is a community organizer through the San Diego Organizing Project, and you'll be hearing from her later this evening. We are here in order to advocate for positive change in public policy to bring us all closer to the world God intended for us in the first place. We are seeking a plan of action to make affordable housing a reality here in North County. Our hope this evening, however, is simply to give us all a deeper understanding of the problem before us. Together, we work towards solutions that make better this community in which we all live. At the end of the presentations this evening, there will be a Q&A with our speakers. There are note cards available to you at the front table if you'd like to jot down your questions as we go. And if you are joining us on the Zoom this evening, you are welcome to add your questions to the chat stream, and we'll make sure that those questions come before our presenters as well. The Zoom is being recorded tonight in order to make it available for those who cannot be with us, so that everyone has access to the content that we'll receive this evening. Thank you again, all of you. Really, I am startled and heartened by the number of people who are gathered here this evening and come from so many places. And we are most grateful. Presence for your heart, for your wisdom as we gather in conversation together. We have speakers who are both here in person as well as on video. And our first speaker tonight does come to us on video. His name is Ted Cabanas. I had the opportunity to meet Ted. He's an extraordinary individual. He is the recipient of the services of the Community Resource Center and shares with us his compelling story.
Cool. My name is Ted Cabanas. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on my experience with housing in our community. 5 years ago, I made some pretty bad mistakes and I ended up losing all of my things financially, and I ended up living in a car in parking lot in Encinitas. It was suggested to me that I reach out to the Community Resource Center, and by the grace of God, they got me 6 months of rental assistance after living in my car for 14 months. And I was able, during that 6 months, I was able to make a full-time job of looking for a new career. And that's what I did. I was lucky enough to land a job with the largest delivery company in the world. And in my first year, I made $80,000 gross. And when I started making the money, I promised my son that once I was back on my feet, I would get us a 2-bedroom apartment so that his mother and I could split custody. The first thing I did was I went to an apartment complex I rented from 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath was $1,495. The same bedroom today, the same apartment today was $3,500. And when I met with the rental property, I asked a number of questions. The first was, well, what are the financial qualifications? And to which she replied, you have to make 3 times the amount. So if the rent's $3,500, I said, so I have to make $126,000 to live here. And she said, well, we can base it off of your gross income. And I said, well, my gross income is $5,600, but my take home is around $4,000 to $4,300. And I said, the median income in our community is $65,000 a year. I make $15,000 more than the median income. If I can't afford to live here, who are you renting to and who can afford these prices? To which she replied, if you want to live here, you have to be dual income or have a roommate. I work between 50 and 60 hours a week, most of the time 6 days a week. I'm an active member of my church, and I do a lot of volunteer work for our community. I feel like I'm doing everything right, and I still cannot afford to live here. My hope is that one day my son can afford to live here. We don't want to move away. This is our community. We love Encinitas, and I hope we can have, my family can have families to come in the future. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. God bless.
If you ever have a chance to meet Ted, he's an extraordinary man. Our next speaker here in person with us this evening is Bob Kent. Mr. Kent is a 30-year resident here in Encinitas, an affordable housing advocate with extensive knowledge and experience. I've been in a lot of Zoom rooms with him, and I'm always amazed at what I learn in his company. Bob comes to us this evening from the Keys to Homes. Bob, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. So, thank you. My name is Bob Kent. I'm an Encinitas resident. Thank you. My name is Bob Kent. I'm an Encinitas resident. And back in 2018, Lois Sunrich, who's a longtime Acadia resident and artist, and I started Keys for Homes. We advocate for the building of more affordable homes here in our hometown, Encinitas, for our seniors, millennials, and family residents, as well as for our workers who are in between $15 to $25 an hour. And of course, so many others, we just heard Ted's story, who are commuting long distances or finding difficult living situations in order to stay here in Encinitas in the city we serve. Next slide. The purpose of my presentation tonight is to provide a brief overview and history of affordable housing here in Encinitas, and then I'll hand it over to Jim Stuyven, sitting over there, to talk a little about the legal issues involving affordable housing. Next slide. So the first topic is to answer the question, what is affordable housing? A good rule of thumb is the 30% rule, which says a household should spend around 30% of their monthly gross income on housing. Now, there are different types of affordable housing, including naturally occurring affordable housing, Section 8 vouchers, accessory dwelling units, and affordable by design. The focus of tonight, my presentation, will be deed restricted affordable housing, sort of a technical term. Deed restricted affordable rental apartments and home ownership is a mechanism for preserving the long-term affordability units whose rents or resale prices are reduced to below market levels through typically a government or other type of financial support. By supporting a 100% model affordable, we advocate for a 100% deed restricted, well-designed, sustainable community. In Encinitas, that could involve using city-owned property or other public resources. It's essential that the public and private sectors work together to ensure long-term affordability and sustainability of these type of communities. Next slide, please. I think we all know people who need affordable housing, like our seniors on a fixed income, so many of our workers, including teachers and school support staff, healthcare workers, our lifeguards and EMTs, along with so many of our essential service workers, which I think we really got a better feel for during COVID. Then there are those young professionals and millennials, including those who have no way of returning to live in their own home. Next slide. Now let's discuss our housing affordability crisis. Unfortunately, due to high housing and rental costs, many lower income households are spending more than half their income, well in excess of the 30% threshold I just mentioned, on housing costs, resulting in sometimes really difficult decisions. Rent versus medicine, or going to the doctor, or car repair, or access to healthy food, or running the very real risk of experiencing homelessness. Or those having to make very long distances commuting, leading to worsening traffic and the acceleration of our climate crisis. So there's definitely and interconnection between regional transportation planning and how we solve our housing affordability challenges and address climate change. The next few slides are going to illustrate how the combination of lower wages and limited housing supply help create our housing affordability crisis. Next slide.
Hold on, sorry, Bob. Oh. It's just moving. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what's going on. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Oh, yeah. Got it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so this slide
Sorry.
shows how renters need to earn $43 an hour, almost 3 times the minimum wage to afford median asking rent. Unfortunately, many of our workers earn between $15 to $20, resulting in a huge rent burden. Next slide, please. One of the questions that comes up, the next two slides say it all. Over the past several years, rents have risen substantially, as evidenced by that chart with the line going right up. Next slide, please. While renters' income has failed to keep up with increasing rents. And so you can see that gap there. That gap is our housing affordability gap. Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at Encinitas' affordable housing progress over the last several years. Only 14% of our low-income housing needs have been met. Only 24% of moderate income housing needs have been met, while we built plenty of above moderate income housing over the last several years. Next slide. No, this is a little hard to read, but one of the questions that comes up around affordable housing here in Encinitas is that Encinitas is an affluent community. Why do we need affordable housing? One reason is to provide affordable housing opportunities for our workforce. Another reason is that about 29% of our Encinitas households qualify as low income based on their average median income. So we know there is a need. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's briefly talk about Encinitas' affordable housing history, including the housing element. The housing element plan is required by state law. It is developed to ensure the city plan for its housing supply to adequately accommodate for low, moderate, and above moderate income households currently living or expected to live in Encinitas. Also, not having an approved housing plan exposes the city to state legal action and also jeopardizes the city's ability to obtain certain state grant funds. With respect to building homes for lower income households, the housing element must identify parcels of land to be zoned as residential 30, which is intended to provide residential development with a density between 25 to 30 units per acre. It's important to note that the housing element plan is not a mandate to build housing. It's basically the city's blueprint to plan for future housing needs. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about our own unique affordable housing journey here in Encinitas. The city voted to incorporate in 1986. One of the driving forces of incorporation was local control of land acquisition. Let's fast forward to June 2013, when Proposition A was passed by the voters. Prop A requires a public vote, a citywide vote, to allow the city to make any exception to citywide building height limit of 30 feet or 2 stories. The key takeaway is this: any housing element that includes parcels of land that increases the zoning to 30 units per acre apply to state law, including any new affordable community here in Encinitas, will require a public vote. Around the same time, the city was being sued to have a compliant housing element plan. So in 2016 and 18, the city councils at the time approved housing elements known as Measure T and Measure U, respectively, and placed them on the ballot as required by Prop A. However, both measures failed and our lawsuits continued. The city ended up losing its lawsuits, and in 2019, under a court order, the city adopted the housing plan, which included 15 sites zoned to accommodate more, the building with more affordable homes in Encinitas. So after over 20 years, lots of money spent on lawsuits, the city of Encinitas finally had a compliant housing law. I'm going to turn it over to Jim Steigen now, who will address some of the legal issues around involving affordable. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tim Steigen. Glad to see you all here tonight. It's a pleasure to have all of this crowd gathered at St. Andrews. I'm a member of Faith and Action Ministry here at St. Andrews. I'm also a retired judge. So I'm going to pick up from Bob Ludlow and talk about some of the legal aspects that concern these issues that we're talking about here tonight. And the legal aspects are important because they both set the requirements on the city of Encinitas to build affordable housing, but also establish some restrictions on our ability to actually do that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the housing element, which Bob made reference to. It's important to understand the background of how the housing element comes into play and how it affects the obligations of the city to move forward with respect to affordable housing. You should understand that the housing element is part of a statewide set of laws that are designed to help the communities in California meet the needs for affordable housing that are known to exist throughout the state. One of the state agencies, HCD, which is Housing and Community Development. Can I have the next slide? That agency of the state goes to each county within the state and requires the county, some agency within the county, in San Diego, it's Sandag, requires one of the agencies within the county to do an assessment of what the needs of the county will be for the next 8 years based upon expected population growth. That assessment, or the analysis that the county does, in this case Sandag, is called the RHNA, R-H-N-A. Next slide. That stands for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Now, once that is done, it's done for each municipality within the county. So a particular RHNA is set out for the city of Encinitas, just like for all of the other municipalities within the county. The city then, having received this statement of what the building needs will be for our city, the city then must prepare a plan or a study that will show how we will achieve those goals, both in terms of the total numbers of new units that have to be built and the total numbers of units that are designated for low and very low income households. So that document, the study that the city does, the plan, is called the housing element that Bob referred to. And that housing element, which Bob, when he was going over the history, the housing element, what's called the 5th cycle. We're now in our 6th cycle for the housing element. In the 5th cycle, it was filed in 2019 after the court proceedings. We immediately began work on the 6th cycle, which is the one that we're in right now, and the 6th cycle housing element was filed by the city in 2021. Now, the RHNA, that is the needs assessment by Sandag for the city of Encinitas, calls for the building of 1,554 new units, and of those, over half are designated to be priced for low and very low income households. The city's 6th cycle housing element that was filed in response to that RHNA assessment was approved by the state back in 2021. It identifies 15 or 16 sites in the city that are appropriate for development in order to meet these housing needs. Next slide. So that's on a map that shows all of the parcels that are designated within the city for development. Now, the housing element that was filed based on these parcels actually calls for or projects the building of 1,635 total units that would be built over these next 8 years, of which, according to our housing element, 1,355 of those are designated for low or very low income households. So this looks good. Our plan that we filed in the housing element exceeds the requirements that were set forth in Reno, even with a buffer. But the problem is that the housing element, as Bob indicated, is just a plan. It's not a requirement. And so what's happened is that the city staff over this past year has been analyzing the applications for building permits that have come back for developers for the sites that are referenced in the housing element. And what the city staff found was that based upon the actual applications and for permits that have been submitted and approved by the city or are pending in the city, they reported to the council that in fact, it appears that we will fall well short of our obligations to build affordable housing, that is housing in the low and very low income ranges. And specifically, what the staff reported to the city council was that even though the housing element calls for the building of 1,355 units for low or very low income, in fact, the number that they project will be built based upon applications for permits that have been received is something in the order of about 350 units rather than 1,355. Next slide, please. Now, the reason for this is because, as I indicated, the housing element, says the bigger number, is just a plan. And the city cannot require developers to actually build the number of low-income houses that are called for in the housing element. And that is because there is law, state law, based on cases and litigation that's gone on before, that indicates that developers cannot be required to do a project that does not produce a, quote, fair and reasonable return, unquote, on their investment. In addition, state law prohibits the city from taking action that would make new development, quote, financially infeasible, unquote. So developments, in fact, as we've experienced, can be and usually are approved by the city with far fewer available units for low income and very low income households that are set out in the housing element. Now, the city of Encinitas in 2021 did adopt an inclusionary ordinance, which does require that any new development approved by the city, the developer must show that they will dedicate at least 15% of the total units built as qualified for very low income households, or alternatively, 20% of all units for low income households. And this has been upheld as within legal bounds and was approved by the city last year. But this means that that is all that the city can actually demand of the developers that are submitting applications for permits. And this means, for example, I'll give you an example from an actual project that has been approved by the city council, where the 6-cycle housing element projects that 225 low-income units would be built in that project. The developer, in fact, will only build 72 low-income units. Looking at all the projects that are on the books and that are included in the housing element, the projection of 1,335 low-income units will not be met. And in fact, based upon the permits that have been approved, we're expecting, as I indicated, that around 350 low-income units will be built. Now, there are a few parcels for which applications for permits have not yet been filed. And so if you add those in and take a reasonable guess as to what the low income percentage will be on those units, we might be up in the 380, 390 range in terms of low income units, but far short of where we are with respect to what's required under the housing element. And this reality has not been lost on state regulators. the HCD, the Housing and Community Development Agency of the state, notified the city this past summer of this likely shortfall under what's called the no net loss rule, which just basically means that what we find is that the number of affordable units actually approved by the city falls short of those required under the housing element, then the city is required to identify additional parcels that can be developed in order to meet the requirements under the housing element. And so the HCD has actually ordered the city at this point in time to identify additional sites within the city beyond those in the housing element that are possible for development so that the city could meet its requirements under the housing element. As Bob indicated, if we don't do that, if the city doesn't meet its requirements under the housing element, the state has the right to decertify the housing element that was filed, and the result of decertification of the housing element could result in our inability to obtain state grants, and it could also subject the city to lawsuits, either by the state or by members of the public under state law. So, what is the city of Encinitas doing about this dilemma? First, the city is currently evaluating the prospect of building or permitting to be built a 100% affordable housing project. They say 100% or as close thereto as possible, to give it a little leeway. But the advantage of trying to build a project that is basically 100% or close thereto of affordable units within that project has certain various advantages. For one thing, if you can imagine that a single project might yield, say, 250 or 300 or even as many as 400 affordable units in a single project, this would significantly reduce the shortfall that we're experiencing and would also make it more likely to be able to pass a Prop A vote. So if a parcel needs to be submitted to a public vote under Prop A to upzone it so that more units could be built, and those are all affordable units, it would be easier to pass a Prop A vote if we're dealing with just one or two such parcels located in areas of the city that are proper for dense development than it would be to identify 7 or 8 or 10 different sites all around the city that would have to be passed by a Prop A vote. The city council in 2021 announced its support for a 100% affordable housing project. The city hired a consultant about 20 months ago to evaluate sites in the housing element that would be suitable for 100% affordable housing development, including 2 city-owned parcels. Unfortunately, that report has stalled, and the final report has still not been submitted to the city council. A second thing that the city is doing is that they have authorized the hiring of a consultant to identify new sites within the city that might be suitable for development. And that would perhaps result in additional housing and low-income housing being built. However, as of yet, that consultant has not yet been hired, and none of the work has actually been done. So those new sites have not yet been identified. The third thing that could be done is to consider raising the requirements of its inclusionary ordinance. As I mentioned to you, we have an ordinance in place in the city of Encinitas that requires that 15% very low income or 20% low income be included in every project. But it is possible that city council could decide to raise the numbers, raise the percentage in the inclusionary element based upon studies of other jurisdictions in the state and litigation that is involved in those jurisdictions. I would opine, not officially, but opine that something in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% would probably be permissible under state law. But that's something that the council will have to examine and determine based upon advice of their attorneys. There are 2 other pieces of legislation in the state that you should at least be aware of that affect our ability to build affordable housing in Encinitas. One is SB 9, that's Senate Bill 9, which was passed by the legislature in 2021 and went into effect last January, a year ago. And SB 9 simply stated would allow property owners of property currently zoned R1, that is for single-family homes. They could apply to build a duplex on that property or split the lot to allow 2 homes to be built on that R1 property. So far, that process has not much been utilized within the state of California. And to my knowledge, no such applications have been submitted in Encinitas. But it is something that can be considered as a possible way to increase access to affordable housing. Another piece of legislation to be aware of is SB 4, Senate Bill 4, which was recently introduced in the state Senate and is currently pending there. It's not law, it's just pending. But it would eliminate many administrative hurdles to building affordable housing on property owned by educational or religious organizations. And there are several sites in Encinitas that could take advantage if this SB 4 becomes law. So you can see this is a complex issue, but there are things the city can do and perhaps must do in order to make affordable housing more available. And there are things that you can do to advocate city officials to do the right thing and hopefully result in the building of more affordable housing, both to meet the needs of our community and to comply with the law and avoid unnecessary lawsuits. So thank you for your attention. My pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Steve Swayicki, who is the Vice President of Community Housing Works, which is a leading developer of affordable housing in California.
Hold on, Steve. Trying to close this. I guess I'm just gonna have to close it.
I'll get things started. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. It's great to see so many friendly faces here that I assume are really here to promote the growth of affordable housing here in Encinitas and hopefully beyond in San Diego County. There we are.
Hold on just a second. I'm gonna share it so that the people on Zoom can see it. And then we're gonna put that in slideshow mode. Okay.
There you go. Okay, I just want to start off. I'd like to begin by noting the overall need for affordable housing here in San Diego County. Recent study completed by the California Housing Partnership determined that there's approximately 132,000 families, low-income families, that don't have accessibility to affordable housing. The same study noted that okay. The same study noted that 81% of extremely low income families, these are people that are earning the lowest levels at 30% of the income average for the county, are paying more than 50% of their income for its rent specifically. And that's a huge burden when you consider all the other things that are coming into your life right now. Increased food costs, increased healthcare, etc. We all know what's coming down the road here. And it hits the people at the bottom the most and the hardest. As Bob mentioned, need to earn about $43 an hour in order to really afford the average San Diego rent of $2,200. It's a stifling number. It's 3 times the minimum wage that's required in the city of San Diego. To give some comparisons, childcare workers and retail workers earn about $17 an average on $17 an average, $17 an hour on average, sorry. And medical workers are earning about $20 an average. So there's a continual gap there that needs to be sort of filled. And I think housing is really the solution. One more. My firm is Community Housing Works. We are a 34-year-old nonprofit affordable housing developer. We develop throughout the state. Our portfolio is comprised of 45 projects that total about 4,000 units. And we have a development pipeline of 12 projects that also will be yielding eventually about 1,200 units. And there's the map. Our projects span from as far north as Sacramento and all the way down here to San Diego, and 8 counties in between. And our expansion efforts continue to date. So we're moving on into other areas as well, and hopefully Los Angeles by the end of this year. CHW was born in North County, San Diego. About 2/3 of our portfolio lies within county limits. As a nonprofit developer, we maintain ownership and perpetuity of all of our properties, which ensures that the quality of those assets will be maintained, and that the legacy and the affordability will continue to live on. Our mission is pretty simple. Opportunity begins with a stable home. We build, and renovate life-changing affordable apartment communities that provide resident-centered services so that families and seniors and people with disabilities can forge a strong future. We serve more than 10,000 individuals and are committed to equity, diversity, and being a good neighbor, which is always an important part of the outreach and development process of any affordable deal. What are some misconceptions about affordable housing? Well, let's think about who works there first. People that surround us in our everyday life, essential workers. These are nurses, teachers, people that keep the grocery shelf stocked. There's also include seniors and people with disabilities. One of the things that happens so frequently is we end up doing a lot of outreach for our new projects, and we find people coming to us saying, well, how can I keep my parents around, or how can I keep them in California? It's so darn hard to keep them near us, and they can't continue to keep up with the expense of living day to day. So it's a tough job, and we're continuing to fight on that front. Affordable housing also creates jobs and increases productivity. As Bob mentioned, when people don't have to commute from far off to come into Encinitas, for example, it creates economy here. It creates people that can sustain the local, can sustain the store, can sustain any type of environment that you're going into daily. People that come into your homes, it could be a nurse, it could be a daycare giver, it could be someone who's watching after your kid. So this is all stuff that I think really need to keep in mind when there's people who are spending an hour and a half each way on the road to come and go to Encinitas as an example. It just ends up adding to stress in their life, and the quality of their life decreases substantially. So that's another thing. Quality of life does increase in affordable housing properties. And it creates an opportunity eventually for people to save money, as the rent is severely discounted in most instances, and to put it away and stock it away for a home with their own potential one day. So that's really the goal, is to create continuation, upward mobility for folks. So with that, I'd like to provide a brief overview of several completed Community Housing Works developments, as well as 2 that are under construction. And here's the fun part. This is La Casa Paloma. This is a fully affordable 180 unit development located right off the 4th fairway of the Omni La Casa Resort in Carlsbad. It's completed in 2007 as part of a greater master plan, as part of the greater La Casa master plan project. This is an interesting project, and you've maybe seen it before, and it often gets mistaken for a market rate property because the architecture and the aesthetics of it are just that pleasing to the eye. And I'd say about once a month, we get an offer from somebody just made, unsolicited, to see if they could possibly be interested in selling. And when we tell them it's affordable, they're absolutely flabbergasted. So it just goes to show the quality, almost 15 years later, at this point, what it looks like. Moving on, I want to talk about some innovation in affordable housing. We're many times given the opportunity to explore new funding resources with our projects. Solara is a 56-unit development located off of Community Road in Poway. It was the first net zero project in the nation to be fully powered by the sun, showcasing how affordable projects can be innovative for sustainable development going forward. This innovation actually earned this project award of excellence from the Urban Land Institute. They never touch affordable complex. They're usually looking for bigger and shinier things, but this one won a cube for our office, which stands proudly in our atrium. So just something to keep in mind about how it can really be something at the forefront. Moving on, I want to talk about, we're going to skip that one. North Park Seniors. This is a 76-unit senior project located at the intersection of El Cajon and Texas Boulevard in North Park, as the name says. This was a privately purchased land piece that Community Housing Works took down and ended up assembling financing for. This is an LGBTQ affirming project for seniors, and it also includes 10 units within that were set aside specifically for homeless seniors. So it has a lot of things going on in it. It has an open community room that the general public can access. And it also includes a number of sustainable features, including solar photovoltaic and thermal systems. Financing for this project was structured in a couple of ways. It included money from the San Diego Housing Commission, Civic San Diego, which is the former development agency, which is now part of the city of San Diego, as well as 4% tax credits. Keeler Court. This is a 71-unit family project located in San Diego's South Crest neighborhood. This was one of the first projects that this is actually one of the first projects in the city of San Diego to utilize cap and trade funding underneath the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Funding Program. It provided $10 million of funding, not only to help build the housing, but it provided 2.5 miles of bike lane improvements to the surrounding area. And it actually purchased an MTS bus. So this funding can actually go into the greater good. It created also lit crosswalks and some upgrades to the landscaping that was along this bike lane, those bike lane improvements. We'll bring it all back home here. Esperanza Gardens, it's less than a mile from here. Most people don't know of it. It's 30 units. That was affordable that we purchased in 1995. When it was purchased in 1995, it was the first project. I think it was when it was built in 1995. Excuse me, it was the first project that was built as affordable in almost 20 years. We maintain this as a prideful point of a portfolio, but it's a little bit smaller than what we normally own. But when you drive by it, you might know now. Take a look. Okay, moving along, I want to talk and discuss a couple of projects that we're working on currently. Cortez Hill Apartments. This is an 88-unit ground-up development that's Community Housing Works is working on in the Cortez Hill neighborhood of San Diego, downtown San Diego. This was a former hotel that was used for transitional family housing, and which ultimately fell into a state of disrepair. Community Housing Works negotiated with the city and the San Diego Housing Commission to reevaluate some of the affordability covenants that were underneath. We were able to negotiate a purchase agreement with the city of San Diego through the Surplus Land Act. And this project is now demolished and it will be beginning construction, hopefully this quarter, to become 88 units. And this is also an interesting project in the sense that it also will not have parking. That's not a common thing in most of our properties, but because of the transit-oriented location of the site, it will accommodate that pretty well. And then just moving on to one final project. This is the Kimball Highland Master Plan, located down in National City. This is 145 units of 145 units that will entail a PACE facility, 40,000 square feet of PACE. It'll cater to tenants that are earning between 30 and 70% area median income for San Diego County. It was a unique partnership. It was a private purchase on behalf of Community Housing Works, and it also entailed a land donation by the city of National City, as well as some funding dollars. And that should be completed, I think, probably early next year. So I just want to move on to the affordable housing finance side. Now, this is one of the more complex things that you can actually get into on our side of the business. Developing it is actually easy, believe it or not, comparatively to putting the financing together. It's a complex puzzle that relies on multiple funding sources that stem from local, state, and federal levels. And like a wedding cake, you stack the bottom first and you work your way up. And those resources, if leveraged against one another, end up filling up your capital stack altogether. The stack generally starts off at the local level. It can start off with a city land donation, start off with city dollars that are available that can be coupled with a private purchase. Affordable developers obviously prefer to have the land built in for free, but it's not always the case. And in most instances, Community Housing Works actually pursues private land purchases and moves on these projects by ourselves and then assembles the financing subsequently. City loans and state HCD funding mechanisms further attempt to fill any remaining gaps after. And the next step is ultimately applying for tax credits. And there's two different methodologies, one's 4% non-tax credit and one's 9%. They're both absolutely competitive. There's a bond shortage at this point, so affordable housing isn't getting developed at the same tick that it used to be. But there's lots of methodologies that are being employed at this point, including trying to find private sources of funds that can help build these projects. And ultimately the competition is getting stiffer and stiffer. To begin, 9% tax credits were a competitive process. Now 4% are just as equally part of that due to some shortages of bonds within the state. But we continue to fight, and it's a righteous fight, and we're here to answer any questions, and we hope to hear some more support from you guys. So thank you so much for your time today. And I think we're going to show a short video from one of our recent scholarship events.
My name is Kayla Saraya Moreno, and I live at Las Serenas Apartments in San Diego. I grew up in Escondido in Orange Place Apartments. I was there with my mother, my brother, and my dad in a 2-bedroom apartment. Before moving into Orange Place Apartments, my mother told me that we rented a bedroom in an apartment with, I think, a random family. I guess that was really hard for her as well, to raise 2 children and not have her own space, and also with my dad. So it was like 4 of us in a bedroom. And so that's when my mother applied and heard about affordable housing through Community Housing Works, and she applied and she was given her own apartment at Orange Place. And so that was a big milestone for my mother. Living at Orange Place was probably one of the most beautiful memories I have. There's so much community there. My parents were really involved with our neighbors. It was also a great time because I was able to connect with my brother and my neighbors, and I learned how to ride a bike there, how to read, how to be a leader. It was a great time living in those apartments. Living at Las Serenas has been great because of the community and the involvement everyone has in the Learning Center and with each other. I was also able to become a leader through Las Serenas Learning Center. There I was part of the Achievers throughout my whole high school career, and it has been great as well because I was able to help my community members by tutoring their younger children and reading with them, and honestly even cooking. We learned a few recipes here in the Learning Center, so it's been a great experience, and I'm very blessed to be part of this community. I am a 3rd-year student at San Diego State University. I'm studying criminal justice with a minor in women's studies, but I'm looking into law school and if not graduate school, and studying nonprofit management. The Ballard Scholarship has impacted my life because it has helped me buy purchase books, school supplies, and it has really helped me as a student as well because it has given me an opportunity to focus more on schoolwork and the leadership roles that I play at my university rather than focusing a lot on financial struggle. Living in the apartments that are built by community housing work has meant that my family and I could really focus on ourselves and our growth and as well as our community. I can't imagine living anywhere else that provides such many resources that community housing work does, and so those resources have allowed us to really thrive in our individual lives and as a family. Home means love. I think to me it means being able to share beautiful moments with the people you cherish the most. For my family, we love to cook. Being able to share those moments with my mother, who passes down her recipes to my brother and I. Being able to watch our favorite shows, our telenovelas that my mom likes to watch. My mom and I study together. I mentioned that her and I now study together, and having that moment, that's what home means to me, having beautiful moments with your loved ones.
How are we all doing? None of us came here expecting a simple solution to this problem, did we? No, I thought not. A couple guests have arrived that I wasn't able to introduce earlier. City Council member Allison Blackwell is with us this evening, present. There she is in the back. And on Zoom, we have Deputy Mayor Joy Lindis. So welcome to her as well. She's a neighbor. You know, as I listen to all of these wonderful speakers, I would just let you know that I incarnate this issue. I've been a pastor here in Encinitas for 15 years, and like probably many in this room, I'm not able to afford housing in the community. So I live in a creative housing option, which I really enjoy, but it is at the grace of an ancillary member of the congregation who allows me to live on property in a small casita. I have 2 kids in college, and those are just the realities. So when Steve was speaking about the affordable housing looks like many, many faces, I happen to be one of them. On the outside, I have coyotes on my property most evenings, so that's a gift. I am pleased to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Merle Rabinowitz-Bussell is here this evening. Dr. Rabinowitz-Bussell is a professor at UCSD in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the gift that you are in the community. She comes this evening with some very interesting research to share with us. Welcome, Dr. Rabinowitz-Bussell. We're so grateful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Everyone good? A little closer. Yeah. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share with you a project. Admittedly, the data is a little bit old. It's a project I did over 10 years ago, but it's instructive for, I think, 2 reasons. And really, I think builds off of what we heard from our other panelists this evening. So it's learning about what is affordable housing, and so yeah, that's good. So it's a bit about who lives in affordable housing. You've heard some of that already from our panelists, what affordable housing looks like, but it's also a story about how important it is to have data to share with our community, with our elected officials, with our neighbors, so that we can debunk myths and stereotypes about affordable housing and our neighbors who live in affordable housing. So this is a study done for the city of Poway. You go to the next slide. And so what happened is, this goes way back to the early 2000s. There was a consortium of developers, including customers, who said, you know, let's get together. They were doing great work developing affordable housing, and said, let's work with the city of Poway and let's come up with a way to raise awareness for the broader community about the importance of developing affordable housing. And to be clear, what I'm talking about is what we heard Bob talk about as deed-restricted affordable housing. So this is housing that has some type of subsidy built into it. It's designed to be affordable for a very long time. And so the goal was to go out and do a pretty deep dive looking at the existing affordable housing developments in Poway, who lived in them. We did a survey. We asked everyone who lived in an affordable housing in Poway to participate, because we wanted to be able to share out and say, Howlegians, these are your neighbors who are living in these developments, and this is what they look like compared to the overall. So we go to the next slide. Just as a way to kind of frame the conversation, I think it is useful to look at Poway because in many respects, Poway and Encinitas, some of our other North County coastal towns, share similar demographics in terms of high median income, really high cost of housing. So I think it's a good case study for us to be looking at here. So let's talk about the study. So again, this was over 10 years ago. I worked with some great students. I always try to include my students in my research. And so what we did is we collected data on these 6 different categories, and these categories were selected because those were issues that we knew were important to all residents of Poway, right? So what was the impact? What would be the impact on the city when we develop affordable housing on things like property values? Do property values go down when we build affordable housing? What's the impact on school quality when the residents of affordable housing are students at the local schools? What's the impact on the local schools? We also looked at crime rates. Is there a relationship between developing affordable housing and crime rates going up or going down? We looked at water consumption. Water is a big issue, you know that, right? These developments going to be using more water than other types of developments. We also looked at neighborhood aesthetics. You know, is this a value add in terms of aesthetics? We saw the amazing presentation of what Community Housing Works is doing and the attention to architecture and design, and then sustainability, right? So looked at these different issues and we collected a ton of data, lots of different data sources. So this was all driven by data. So our goal was to say, look, we're not just saying we think it's this, but this is what the data is showing us. So we collected data on these 6 categories, and then we did surveys of the residents in all these communities. So we can go to the next slide. So and keep going. So what did we learn? So we learned that a high percentage of the residents either were born or raised in Poway and or live there and or have family there. There are myths and misconceptions that affordable housing will draw you to you. The reality is in Poway is that this was housing that was serving folks that already had really deep ties. Either they worked there, they had family there, they grew up there. Again, you can see a really high number worked in Poway. So it enabled them, as we heard from other panelists, to be able to have those shorter commutes, to be able to get to their jobs much quicker. There were also concerns, and there are a lot of concerns and stereotypes that your typical household in an affordable housing development is a large family with lots of kids, right? And that's going to be a strain on existing infrastructure and resources. What we actually found is that the average household size in the affordable housing developments was actually smaller than Poway overall. And that's because, among other things, there were a lot of seniors, either single seniors or couples who were living in these affordable housing developments. Another thing that we did is we included profiles. We asked some of the residents if we could interview them and tell their story so that people could relate, right? Really understand who your neighbors are. Next slide. So we looked at the data on neighborhood impacts, and what we found is that property values were unaffected. Property values did not go down. We looked at a small radius, and we did a 1.25 mile, maybe a mile radius for each of these affordable housing developments to see what the relationship was on property values over time, and they did not go down. We looked at school test scores. They did not decline. In fact, we found the schools that the children who lived in the affordable housing developments went to, their test scores increased faster. We also looked at crime rates. They mirrored city trends. They weren't any worse. They weren't any better. They were similar. What Poway also did is they had a really great program where they partnered with the sheriff's department on a crime prevention program, really teaching people, educating people about what to look for and how to respond when there were concerns about potential criminal activities. And then we found that water consumption was low, so we debunked that as well. Let's go to the next slide.
Skip the fun of it.
In terms of neighborhood aesthetics, we found that they were preserved, and we could argue they were enhanced. So you actually saw already Solara was discussed, in the Community Housing Works presentation. But so what I will say is, so after we completed this report, we shared it, we presented to city council, the mayor, city council. And when we shared things like, do you know that we have award-winning affordable housing developments, nationally award-winning developments that are enhancing the aesthetics of your community? That was received very positively. Also sharing the story about how sustainability is prioritized was very well received by the elected officials, by the members of the public who were in attendance. Next slide. And so to wrap up, so before I was brought in to do this study, Poway had actually done these studies on a semi-regular basis. They haven't updated the study since then. Not quite sure why, but I do want to share that since we did our original study, they have continued, the city of Poway has continued to develop affordable housing. And you can see from these thumbnails here what this housing looks like. Get a sense of the scale, the size, the aesthetics. And again, we've heard this from our other panelists. If you were to drive through Poway and you didn't know which of these developments were affordable housing, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint and say, oh, that's the affordable one. And in fact, in many cases, the affordable developments actually look better than some of the older existing market rate housing. But you can see, you know, Poway has now developed 12 affordable housing developments, close to 900 units of affordable housing. It's got a pretty smaller population than here in Encinitas. And I think that might be my last slide. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have just one final speaker this evening. And at this time, I would like to introduce Judah Coker. Judah is a community organizer with the San Diego Organizing Project. She comes with a passion for the work of justice and with clear mindedness for the way forward. Welcome, Judah. We're so glad you're here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate the turnout for those of you who are in person and on Zoom. As mentioned, my name is Judah Coker. I am a community organizer with a nonprofit called the San Diego Organizing Project. SDOP is a multi-faith, nonpartisan organization dedicated to advancing issues of racial, social, and economic justice. Faith in Action, the group that is hosting this event tonight, partners with SDOP so that we can together envision not only what it looks like to spread awareness about the issue of affordable housing, but most importantly, how we can bring together community voices to actually create the public support needed to make change happen in our communities. And so with that in mind, we really wanted to go deep here today with an understanding of what we could do to see all of this work culminate and make advancements in the city of Encinitas when it comes to the issue of affordable housing. So with that being said, as you all heard tonight, currently there are a number of city-owned properties in Encinitas that could be chosen for a new 100% affordable housing development. And if you're inspired by what you heard today, if you believe in what you heard, if you're passionate at the idea of creating more affordable housing in the city of Encinitas, what we ask of you is that you please leave here and reach out to your city council members in Encinitas and let them know that you not only support more affordable housing, but that you actually want to see movement in choosing a site for 100% affordable housing development. And we really want to emphasize that the Faith in Action team, we've been advocating for this, but just us alone, we're not going to be able to make change. We're not going to be able to make that happen. And so that's why we wanted to put this event on. We wanted to see you all here today because we believe that collectively, with your voices, we'll be able to make a difference. So thank you so much again. If you would like to stay engaged with this team, you could email the email that was sent out to RCMP for the event. And stay involved and hear about more ways to take action. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Judah, and thank you for the good work that you do in our community. Thank you to our speakers for this engaging and thoughtful conversation. I'm assuming your head is as full as mine. If with your full head, you have been able to cogently come up with a question that you would like to ask any of our speakers this evening, they would be happy to answer it. We have about 30 minutes for a Q&A. I'm very certain that within those 30 minutes, we will not be able to get to all of the questions that are here in the room. I'm also aware that many of you on Zoom have submitted your questions. We've done our best to hand those questions, particularly if you directed them to one of our speakers. They're currently in their hands. So we're going to go back and forth between questions from the floor and questions that have come in on the Zoom. The speakers are willing and able to stay as long as they can after this gathering. So we are going to call this at 30 minutes. If you have a pressing, burning question, the speakers will stay as long as they can to answer that for you. Is there somebody who'd like to begin with questions? We do indeed. Who wants to shoot, Jim? It's like a deck of cards. Where would you like to start?
I'm going to give this a go, but I'm going to ask Bob or Steve or Merle to help where they can. There are a bunch of questions here. I'm going to try to touch on them as best I can with the help of my colleagues. First question I have is what are the details about the stalled study that I mentioned of city-owned properties for a 100% affordable housing project, and what properties are under consideration? I can tell you that the city hired a consultant. The consultant did prepare a report. They examined the 10 of the sites that were in the housing element to confirm their appropriateness for development of a 100% project. They came back with a report last year, at the end of November of 2021, and did identify 2 sites that they thought were most likely candidates to be developed as a 100% affordable project. Those 2 sites, I'll tell you, are a site called L7, which is up on Quail Gardens Drive, and the other site is the public works yard of the city of Encinitas, which is located presently back behind the Methodist Church in Outburger, where the city works offices are. There are issues with both of those sites, with the L7 project because of community resistance, and also because other projects are being developed along the Quail Gardens corridor. So that's an issue. With respect to the public works yard, it could be an ideal site for a 100% affordable housing project. However, they have to move the public works yard because that's where the public works exists. So they have to find a place to move the public works yard in order to do that. The city saw those problems and asked the consultant to do some further study and work and prepare a final report. That report was due to be submitted last summer. It was not submitted. It was postponed and it has not yet been submitted. So we're hoping that will come to the fore and that the city council will be able to move forward and take some action with respect to those projects. Another question that just came in is what can we do to convey to the city to increase the required percentage of affordable new units? That would be an inclusionary ordinance that I spoke to. I think what you can do is talk to your city council representatives, to the members that represent your districts, and talk to them about the prospects for increasing the inclusionary ordinance. I happen to know that one city council person is present here tonight is in favor of doing that. But the question is, what can be done under the law, or the law permit, in terms of increasing the percentage of affordable units that would be required of a developer? That question has not yet been answered, so if that's something that would have to be studied. There are 2 questions here on this part. One is, what does it take to rezone empty commercial units into affordable housing? That is a prospect that I think the city council is going to have to look at because there is state law that gives certain incentives and ability and waive certain requirements if you're going to convert commercial property into affordable housing. But the problem is with this and with respect to other properties, these properties are privately owned. And so the city doesn't have control over them. They have to work with the owners of those properties in order to determine whether or not they can be converted. The second question, or another question like that, is that there must be additional existing units in the city that might be appropriate to convert to affordable housing. And again, that is true. There are some units, some properties that are on the housing element that are like a hotel complex that is not being operated presently. But it's privately owned. So something would have to be done. The city would have to give some incentive to the owner in order to want them to permit it to be developed as affordable housing. Bob or Steve, you want to, or Merle, you want to add anything?
Just like that, really quickly, there's an assembly bill which will take foothold, I believe, in July of this year called AB 2011. And it will permit for the conversion of commercial properties that lack any residential under to them to be converted at various levels of density. I think in this particular region or this county, I think we're at the minimum is set at about 30 dwelling units per acre. And it's going to be something that's going to be basically a state law that has to be passed through. So people are going to have to get used to that this year, I think, or many cities are going to have to get used to that. So commercial buildings these conversions will ultimately be 100% affordable. And there's going to be an element of affordability required no matter what. It comes with some stipulations as far as prevailing wage, a couple other potential labor agreements that could be part of it. So but I think it really focuses in on creating affordable housing, 100% deed restricted affordable housing.
Before we move to other questions that we may have from the Zoom screen, or from those who've written them down, if any of you, of course, sitting right here before me, have anything you'd like to ask us? Yes.
Who among this group or other players leads the charge in convincing our electorate that this is the right thing to do? They're going to have to vote. We have a very strong vocal NIMBY group in our organization, in our city. Who leads the charge in convincing our voters that any particular project is worth this effort?
For those on the Zoom screen, the question is, who is it that leads the charge with all of this that we are looking forward to doing? And I think the question was directed as you at this, the four of you at this table. I'm not certain any of you are the leaders of the charge. I think it might actually be all of us, but that's a really good question, right? How do we move forward, right? And who's going to lead that? Good questions.
I'm just going to say, this is one thing that we can do. Have a meeting like this, and hopefully others that will follow it. Because our desire is to both educate and create advocacy. And so ultimately, it lays with everyone that is here, and your neighbors and your friends, to realize that this is a real issue in this community, and that you should be in dialogue with your elected representatives, try to solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just put on my academics hat and say that if we go back and look at history and we see where we've seen success in getting some really impactful housing policies passed, it's from diverse coalitions. And it comes from our faith-based institutions. It comes from labor. It comes from the working class, the upper class, the middle class. I would also argue our youth, because this really is a lot about their future, and getting our youth involved, I think, is really critical. I think there's a lot we can do to be educating kids in our local high schools about this. So we gotta bring everyone together. But again, if you look back in history, it's these types of really diverse, powerful coalitions. But it does take time, right? It takes time because you've got to build trust and build relationships. But you got to start somewhere. This is a great, the turnout tonight, right? I think it speaks volumes.
Thank you. Splendid answer and excellent question. Yes, sir.
Is the city involved in choosing the residents? How do you become a resident of low-cost housing?
A question for the Zoom people, is the city in charge of choosing the residents, and how does one become a resident? Here comes Steve.
Well, the wait lists on these projects are extensive. I'll just give you a quick example of one of our recent property openings. And we start these lists about, sorry, you got me now? We had about 4,000 people apply to be on the list.
There is a list.
As a list, and there was only 76 units. So, and it works in a lottery fashion. So, and it's a very monitored fashion process whereby there's no preference given to one person over the other. It's actually taken at random. So they create a pool of potential tenants, and then they're selected at random. And then that pool continues to run forward in time as people turn over in the units.
Is there a qualification to be on the list?
Yes, it's very much monetary, and it's about how much you earn. And there's a matrix, we can show it to you. Bob did bring it. It's fairly extensive. It sets two things. First off, you're going to be limited by family size and by your income level. And thereafter, what's going to come is the rent will be set based off of that unit size and that income level. So incomes for affordable, truly affordable projects can be from 8% to 30% area income right now. So it ranges the gamut. Most affordable projects are required to have an average affordability of about 59%, just to maintain congruency with the tax requirements, because this is all the stuff in the background that allows these projects to be built is actually due to tax credit equity, which is actually offsets that corporations actually use to reduce their bottom line tax payments. So that probably just dove into a 201 level class right there. So, but anyhow, that's the quick answer is you basically are going to be on a list and be very lucky too.
How do you find the list? How do you get on it? How do you apply? I don't see any.
Yeah, it's project specific for the most part. So you'll hear about a new project coming up. Maybe you'll drive down the road and see it. Maybe you'll hear about it in newspapers. There's advertising requirements that are part of the marketing campaign that are required that to go out in a specific area where the project will be. So there's requirements to be in certain publications. We generally go above and beyond work, and our management company handles a majority of that task, but it's broadcast publicly. It's not something where it's a very select group. So my suggestion would be you should probably keep an eye out as to what's being built, and then find out who the management company is of any particular affordable deal, and then try and see if you can find out how to get on that list.
So the management companies do the list.
But they largely handle that responsibility.
City doesn't have a list.
They may be privy to it depending on interaction, but for the most part, I would stick with that. So.
Yes, I thought I saw a question over there.
So, my question has to do with, our children, both adults, who cannot afford to care, like you mentioned, teachers, and school staff, other people who grew up here but can't afford to live here. They're making less than $30 an hour, but they will never find. Is there anything being done for those people who are not low income, but they are pretty,
I'm going to do my very best to summarize your question for the Zoom audience. What about our children, grown children who can't afford to live here, as well as teachers and first responders and pastors and significant other members of our community who can't afford to live in this area? Is there any kind of specific plan for those who are already fed here? Did I summarize that pretty well? And who would like to take on that one? Oh, my good friend Bob.
That's a great question.
There are fair housing laws around how housing can be allocated. I think the solution there is, I spent most of my advocacy over the last 5 years talking about supply. I actually think we could encourage and advocate the city to make it more transparent and easier for, that's that other gentleman's question as well. Once the housing is in the queue, how can it be accessed and at least get on the wait list? Part of it is supply, part of it is hope that there can be a way where maybe the city makes it more transparent for people to navigate access to the housing. We still have supply shortage, but I think perhaps we can have the city create a more transparent approach to people, so it's not so fragmented. But it is about supply, okay? And I think my view is that Encinitas should do its fair share. And I think, that requires building more housing across the income spectrum, anywhere from $15 an hour to teachers making $70,000 or more. And that requires this type of activity, but also additional subsidies, so that the affordability of those units can be available for our children and our children's children. But it's a bit of a possible balance.
We have 2 more questions coming from Zoom. First, Jim has one to answer and followed by Steve.
This is a question that came in the Zoom chat, and it's a fair question, and one I think that's fair for us to at least think about and talk about a little bit tonight. And that is, the question is, why are we talking about building more buildings? We have housing available, it's just we can't afford them. How much more building can our infrastructure afford in the city? These are things that the city council, people making these decisions or approving permits have to think about. But I will say that we also have to think about what the needs are, and that's one of the things that we're talking about here tonight, and that is the needs that people who serve our community have to be able to try to live in this community. And secondly, a second part of my answer to this is that one of the reasons that we support a project that would be 100% affordable housing is because if you locate a large number of units in a single location in an area that is appropriate for density and is close to major thoroughfares or traffic or transportation or services, then you really aren't overtaxing the infrastructure if you can concentrate in a single project a large number of units that are affordable, what we're talking about.
So there was a question, our senior assisted living facilities, from something called Westmont was referenced, counted as affordable units. They indeed are not. Independent senior living is really only financeable, affordable function to create for affordable housing specifically. So you cannot couple it with services or anything that effect. You can have any type of food service or nursing service within. Oftentimes you'll see affordable built as a separate portion of an assisted living facility, but their financing structures and the way that they're arranged are completely separate. I also can't tell if they said counted or converted, so I will actually take the question on both ends. There are actually opportunities at this point to convert existing facilities if it was an assisted living facility to an affordable unit. However, those services indeed would not be there as far as caring for the individual. So, in case I didn't read that correctly. And there was something referenced to be a project or an affordability span of 20 years on a project, and whether or not they expire and revert to market rate thereafter. Brand new affordable housing has a 55-year affordability covenant built into it. About 25 years, it used to be a 30-year covenant, so it's becoming more and more restrictive as time goes on, and that's great. Very often when projects get re-syndicated, which is when you go in every 15 or 30 years and re-up the projects and take them up to a new standard, a new affordability covenant is placed on there, and therefore it keeps going in perpetuity. But for the most part, 20-year affordability restrictions are in a couple of other southern states whereby, and you see a lot of stories about this, probably in the Wall Street Journal, where you'll see a group of affordable units that convert out, and then all the people within there are sort of at the will of that new owner, and new people move in. So it's not common in California, it's coming harder.
We have, unfortunately, as I knew that we would reach the end of our Q&A this evening, I'd like to have you join me in thanking our presenters for their. We're certainly grateful to them, but I must echo what's been echoed throughout the evening. I am deeply, deeply grateful to all of you. This is an extraordinary turnout for a very difficult, complex problem with very difficult, complex solutions. And the fact that you are willing to be here this evening and to lend your heart and grace to this conversation on behalf of all of us, I'm so thankful for your interest. And as Judah mentioned, if you'd like to continue to be interested, email addresses, you can continue to reach out. There will likely be other gatherings like this. Thank you, not only for what you do this evening, but for what you do in our community as a whole. It's this kind of conversation that allows us to be the community that God intended us to be together. So blessings to all of you this evening, and we look forward to the next time our paths cross. Thank you.